A lightning move by Ukrainian troops into Western Russia took Vladimir Putin's forces by surprise. But with Moscow now ramping up its response, can Kiev hold on to its gains? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the incursion by Ukrainian forces into Russia's Kursk region blindsided not only Russia's military, but also Ukraine's allies. Western military hardware has enabled Ukraine's historic push onto Russian soil. But what are the possible consequences of this move? And will it give Ukraine the bargaining chip it's been looking for?
A moment Ukraine hopes will change the course of its 30-month war with Russia. This Ukrainian army video, released on August 7th, purports to show drones attacking a building in Russia's Kursk region. And then, an extraordinary scene: Russian troops surrendering. For Kiev, its stealth incursion into Russia's western flank represents the largest attack on its soil since World War II. It started one day before, in the early hours of the morning. At first, Russia's President Vladimir Putin appeared stunned into silence. Then this, a day later.
We will have to start with the events in the Kursk region. As you know, the Kiev regime has undertaken another large-scale provocation.
There was little resistance to Kiev's short move, as around 1,000 troops, armored vehicles and tanks swept across their nearly 1,000-kilometer shared border. Overhead, drones and pounding artillery provided cover. Quickly, they reached the outskirts of the city of Sudzha. As Ukrainian forces pushed into the countryside, Moscow sent troops to move its citizens in towns and villages to temporary shelters. They also provided aid. 6 days after its lightning move, Ukraine said its forces had captured around 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory.
Russia brought war to others, and now it's coming back home. Ukraine has always wanted peace, and we will definitely secure peace.
But that reprieve was temporary. Despite blowing up 3 bridges in the Kursk region in 15 days, in the second week of fighting, Kiev's advances have been slowing, and Moscow has sent reinforcements. Crucially, Ukraine had hoped to divert Russia's attention away from its eastern Donetsk region, where Kiev has been nearly brought to its knees. But since Ukraine's incursion, Russia has doubled down on the strategic city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk and advanced on other areas in the east. In this David versus Goliath tableau, will Ukraine's bold gamble against its much stronger neighbour pay off?
Earlier, I spoke to Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin. He explained Russia's approach to dealing with the incursion by Ukrainian forces.
We understand that it's around 4 brigades and 10,000 of people, soldiers over there. In the recent days, we have sufficient defense forces that has stopped any movement of these soldiers further on. Their aim was either to get a nuclear power station near Kursk or to get a big, substantial swath of land to the west from their place at the moment. None of these goals has been achieved. Now they are not moving further. And what has happened, the intermediate result of this action is that, first of all, they did not achieve any their goals, or they did not slow down the advancement of the Russian forces in Donbass. It proceeds very quickly, and they are losing now, burning the best reserves. As for the conclusions, I have to say that, of course, it was a serious damage to those people who has to be evacuated. We have evacuated 115,000 people, and that's, of course, a significant damage to us we have to repair. I have said this is an intermediate, because further on we are going to press, and of course, they will have to leave.
Ambassador, there's understandably a lot of anger amongst the Russian people in the Kursk region, wondering, how did this happen? Did your armed forces take their eyes off the ball?
Well, it happened because, of course, we have concentrated or to deliver what we would like to do. It is to liberate areas populated with the Russian people, and this is Donbass mainly area, Kharkov, and some others. And actually, we were fighting against military goals. I mean, to strike against military objects. What Ukrainian has done in direction of Kursk, they are striking civilian infrastructure and civilian houses and also civilian people. And it means this a terroristic act, nothing else.
And Ambassador, just tell me, a lot of discussion in the West has been in recent months about whether or not President Putin would ever use a tactical nuclear weapon in this war. Is this the kind of red line that has been crossed, that we might see Russia respond with this?
I don't think so. We have President Putin never said that we can use nuclear weapon over there. He has never done this, probably some politologist. And he has also said that this is a type of a conflict which does not need to the use of such kind of weapon. So this is all nonsense. We do not expect it, of course.
And tell me, Ambassador, how has this incursion into Russian land and territory been received by the Russian public? Because nobody has invaded Russia since the Nazis in World War II.
That is absolutely correct. We have drawn our conclusion. And conclusion number one is that Ukraine would like to continue this struggle, by military means, and they do not want to negotiate. And our main conclusion is that negotiations for the moment and for the quite a prolonged period of time is out of the view.
Ambassador, is it now time that everyone sat around the table and drew a line under this war and started negotiating some sort of peace?
I guess I have just answered your question. We do not, in doing this action, they have prevented negotiations at the moment. So, and I think it will not be done until they are present on the Russian land.
And what happens if Ukraine continues to occupy part of the Kursk region, and this goes on for months on end? This is feasible. I mean, how much pressure does that then put on President Putin?
Actually, I can only operate by opinions of some of our experts on this side, and what they are saying is that it can they continue some offensive actions in direction of the north, east, or west, trying to break our lines of defense. But they are burning their best forces right now, and these are the reserve forces which should have been directed to the other side. It is where we are making a serious gains of terrain by offensive. But this can last for some other days, perhaps a week or something. Their lines of supply, they are also not so good to continue it for a long time. And then we will see what's going to happen. So experts varies on assessment. It can take weeks, it can take months, something like that, but no more, of course.
Final question, Ambassador. Were you shocked when you saw the news headlines that Ukrainian forces had swarmed across the border and taken huge chunks of your territory?
Well, I won't deny that. Of course, yes, we were, I would say, very much surprised, unpleasantly surprised, since fight is concentrated in the other area, which are much more important for us and for the Ukrainians. And they simply tried to attack the civilian part of Russia. That was, I would say, shocking, but it was a big surprise for us.
Ambassador Kelin, thanks for your time on Roundtable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, let's meet our guests. Paul Ingram is the former Executive Director of the British-American Security Information Council. He's currently a research affiliate at the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge University, and he joins us from North Wales. Dmitry Babich is a Russian political commentator with 30 years of experience in the Russian federal press. He joins us from Moscow. And here with me in the studio is Martin Smith. He's a senior lecturer in defence and international affairs. That's at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Gentlemen, you're all very welcome to Roundtable. Martin, I'll come to you first. This was as sudden as it was audacious. But my question is, will it change the outcome of the war for Ukraine?
Not quickly and not, I suspect, dramatically, but I think over the longer term, it demonstrates to multiple audiences, I think, something that's very important to the Ukrainian government and wider society, and that is that Ukraine is still in the fight. It's not going to give up. It's not going to sue for peace on Mr. Putin or anybody else's terms. As and when the time comes for a peace negotiation, then Ukraine will expect to have its core interests taken into account. So it's not going to alter things, I think, militarily on the battlefield, but I think in terms of the wider strategic and political and diplomatic picture, then the very fact that, number one, it happened completely unexpectedly, nobody saw this coming, and number two, Ukraine has committed significant military forces in what's referred to as a combined arms manoeuvre, which a lot of people, a lot of Western commentators, apart from anybody else, doubted it was capable of doing militarily. So it's shown its continuing military capability. It's shown that it's capable of taking what you might call strategic surprise. And I think most importantly, as I say, it's demonstrated that it's not interested in suing for peace on somebody else's terms.
Dmitry, I'll come to you. How shocked were you when you heard on the news in Russia that your country had been invaded by Ukraine?
I wasn't shocked at all, because maybe it's not reported widely in the Western media, but a neighboring Russian region, Belgorod, was attacked several times by smaller groups of Ukrainian servicemen, and it is being bombarded, including the big city, Belgorod, you know, the capital of that region. It is being bombarded every day by Ukrainian drones, sometimes even by missiles. So it was not such a shock for me, the fact that Ukrainian forces crossed the border. But I have to confess, militarily, it was unexpected, and it was a military success. But politically, I think it's a huge mistake, which will finally lead to Zelensky's regime's collapse, because it's not immediately clear, and it's not clear in any way, what he's going to do with these gains, with these 1,000 square miles of territory that he took. If he wants to exchange it for Crimea, that may look plausible from the UK or from the United States, where land was exchanged and bought for many years, but it's not going to work in Russia. I think you'll understand. It's like exchanging Wales, a part of Wales, for a part of Scotland. Basically, Russian people live both in Kursk and in Crimea, and they don't want to live under Ukrainian government. And I don't see what kind of model Mr. Zelensky can suggest to the people in Kursk region. Russian model for Eastern Ukraine is clear. I mean, it's conservative. We have been living together for 300 years. So we have this superiority of conservatism, you know. Something that people tried. It might not be ideal, but people have a certain understanding how that will work. The model suggested by Zelensky is simply non-existent. It's just devastation for devastation's sake. What's going to happen to that territory? What's going to be the gain for Ukraine or for Russia from it? I don't see. And of course, it's escalation, because this is a real intrusion into Russian territory. On that scale, for the first time since 1944, not 1945, because the last German troops left Russia in 1944. And Russia still possesses tactical nuclear weapons. So it's a very dangerous, risky move. I hope people, not only in Russia, but also in Ukraine, in the West, will give it a thought. It's a real escalation.
Thanks, Dmitry. I just want to come to you, Paul, on that issue, tactical nuclear weapons. At what point do you think Vladimir Putin will look at this and think now is the moment I use them?
I'm generally very worried about the potential for the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict in the longer term. And by that, I mean over the months and years that this war is likely to continue. But I don't think this particular incursion risks the use of nuclear weapons. I just don't think it's big enough in terms of the strategic impact of the incursion. I think that it's quite interesting to see that the Ukrainians were looking to draw forces from other advances that the Russians have been making in other parts of Ukraine, and that hasn't happened. And I think there has been some degree of caution and lack of action by the Russians in response to this incursion. And I don't think that really spirals off into the use of nuclear weapons. Obviously, nuclear weapons are there, in play, so to speak. And some of the Russian commentators and officials have been at times been keen to point to this possible escalation. But I think it's not helpful to be talking about that right now. I do think that this is an effort by the Ukrainians to boost morale. I think it's an effort by the Ukrainians to build their negotiation position. But I think that it's a very, very risky move, not for the use of nuclear weapons, but for the collapse of the incursion over the coming weeks and the possibility of overstretch. But I'm not a military expert in the ability to keep the supply lines going, and I don't know if anybody knows with any clarity just how risky this action is in terms of its sustainability. But the response from Russian officials, such as former President Medvedev, that now this demonstrates that the Russians just have to win outright and destroy the enemy, I think is both worrying, but also it demonstrates the level of shock and anger that there is within Moscow for this particular action. And I think the Ukrainians do have to tread carefully over the coming weeks.
Well, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is adamant that those responsible for the incursion into Russian territory will face punishment. Let's have a listen to President Putin.
The way we fought with terrorists previously is how we now fight against those who commit crimes in the Kursk region, Donbass and Novorossiya. But the way we achieved our goals in the fight against terrorism is how we will achieve our goals in the fight against neo-Nazism, and we will certainly punish the criminals. There can be no doubt about that.
Martin, so the big question now is, what does Vladimir Putin do next?
I think the question actually is what can he do next? Because I think one of the things that we've been reminded of dramatically, and I don't doubt this was one of the several Ukrainian aims, is just how enfeebled Russia is militarily out with what is happening in Ukraine itself. The first duty of any government, any sovereign government, is to be able to defend and protect its own territory and its own people and its own borders. And Russia has manifestly failed not only to do that, but it's failed so far to significantly roll back the military incursion more than 2 weeks after it occurred. So it's not at all clear to me, looking at the situation as it is today, that Russia actually has the military capability in situ, drawing on the various forces that it has inside its own territory, to be able to mount a significant, a sustained and a sufficiently nimble effort to be able to roll back the incursion. What I think is more likely to happen, and we don't know, and I expect that's entirely intentional on the part of the Ukrainian government, the one way it seems to me this could go seriously wrong from Ukraine's point of view is if unexpectedly Russia was able to seriously interdict and seriously degrade and roll back the incursion, entailing significant losses of personnel and military equipment. There's no indication that that's going to be possible at the moment. But what I think would be more likely to happen, if it seemed that Russia had geared up sufficient strength to be able to seriously threaten to do that, it wouldn't surprise me if we didn't see Ukraine pulling back voluntarily, as it were, to the border and getting out the bulk of its forces and the bulk of its personnel and equipment in good order. I think that would still be a significant political and operational success from the Ukrainian point of view. But in terms of Russia's ability to push it out by force, obviously Mr. Putin would dearly love to be able to do that and to inflict as much punishment on the Ukrainian army and the Zelensky government as he possibly can. But the indication so far is that he just doesn't have the military strength in situ to be able to actually do it.
Dmitry, how much anger do you think there is in the Kursk region? People who were living, working, going about their business. The war was something that was happening on their TV screens, in the news, and now it's come into their back gardens.
Well, that's not exactly the case. You know, I visited Rostov and Bryansk regions, which are right next to Donbass, where the war has been continuing since 2014. You know, 15,000 people died in that war during the 9 years before President Putin decided to get really involved in that fight. And of course, people there have relatives, friends on the other side of the border. Don't forget, for 3 centuries, it was the same country and people moved freely, and there was absolutely no difference between Kharkov and Belgorod. You know, they were located in 30 miles from each other. And if you got a job in Kharkov, that you had an equal chance to get it in Belgorod. So basically, people there know about the war. It's not on their TV screens. It's in their homes. Don't forget that at least 2 million Russians have left Ukraine since 2014. A lot of them went to Russia. However, of course, it was a shock for the village people living next to the border. But even before, Ukrainians have been using drones to attack Kursk itself and to attack Belgorod. Belgorod suffered a lot more. So people there are not so shocked as the Western media believes. Also, the difference between people living in Ukraine and in Russia, you know, in 90% of the cases, if a Ukrainian addressed me in Russian, I would not know that he is Ukrainian. They all speak perfect Russian. And most of Russians understand Ukrainian. We cannot speak it fluently, but we understand it. So the difference between the nations and the languages is very small. And that makes this war so tragic. However, I would not completely agree with Martin that you know, it's so urgently necessary for Putin to fight back this incursion. Let me remind you that the reason why the front line in Donbass is moving so slowly is because for 8 years the Ukrainian army has been digging itself in next to Donetsk, firing at Donetsk almost every day, almost every 2 or 3 days in the best periods. So now, without trenches, these Ukrainian forces may be exposed, and they may be losing more people than Russians. And, you know, Mr. Zelensky gambled because he brought the war to the regions which did not know the war since the beginning of the hostilities, real hostilities.
But Dmitry, a lot of people would say Russia brought the war to Ukrainian civilians who just wanted to live their lives in peace in an independent, sovereign Ukraine.
You are exactly right. And that's why many people in Russia did not support, I think, President Putin's decision and might not support it retrospectively. But if you ask an average Russian, would you stop the war now where it is and just return to the borders of 1991? The huge majority would say no. So the majority of Russians, they might not be happy about the start of the war in 2022, but after all the things that Mr. Zelensky did and all the things that the West did supporting him, now the mood in the country is to bring it to some kind of solution. Maybe a negotiated solution, but certainly not on Mr. Zelensky's terms. And here I disagree with Martin. I think the longer this incursion will continue, the more such incursions happen in the future, the worse will be the conditions for Ukraine at the future negotiations.
Thanks, Dmitry. I want to bring in Paul. Paul, have we reached a moment now where we're getting very close to sitting around the table and hammering out a peace deal?
We've heard talk about the Russians being invited to the next so-called peace conference. If that is done in reasonably good faith, then I think that there is a chance for a dialogue. I think both sides are starting to recognise that they can't get their maximalist positions. We may hear those maximalist positions in public. We may hear former President Medvedev saying that there is no room for negotiations now, only total victory. We hear that from President Zelensky as well. But I think there are signs that the leaderships of both sides, if they believe the conditions could be right, would come to the table. And I do hope that this incursion is seen as a signal to that the Ukrainians are trying to build their position for negotiation, because that's the most powerful signal it represents, because militarily it doesn't make a great deal of sense.
Martin, Dmitry and Paul, thank you all so much for your insight on this. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.